Wonderful. Good evening. We are here gathered with a quorum after a few weeks with Vish, Michael, and Cam and Anurag. And we are here to discuss our ongoing conversations around Awakening from Meaning Crisis of John Vervaeke. And today, what we're hoping to discuss is episode 9 and 10 of that series. Any reflections? Anyone wants to tee up? Just the two, I'll just make two comments. One is that the chapter 9 is called Insights, and the chapter 10 is called, remind me, Consciousness.
Consciousness,
right? Yeah. And he's basically setting up these two fairly foundational set of ideas progressively in these two episodes, which I thought was heavy going and fairly deep and complex. Let me open the floor as to who wants to tee up any observations. Let's start with the Insights chapter or the episode number 9. Anyone?
Sure, I'd love to start because this episode, this lecture was absolutely life-changing for me because I've studied mindfulness for years. And one of the questions I always had, which puzzled me, is how come some people that I've known that have studied mindfulness for maybe even decades don't seem very wise? I couldn't figure it out. Like, how is that possible? And now I know, because he said there's two parts to it. There's the focus on the detail, and there's the overview. And if you go too far either way, you get trapped. And I was like, oh my God, that's so helpful. And also the way he's reframing mindfulness just slightly, it's not like it's dramatic, but he's explaining some of the errors of understanding of mindfulness, which I have observed on my own for years and not known what I was seeing. And so he put it to words. I'm like, fist pump, man, this is really helpful. And I also was struck very profoundly how, again, Ian McGilchrist's brain structure metaphor, or whatever you want to call it, is so relevant here, because he says that if you do the left brain focus and you don't switch back to overview from right brain, you get lost. And he actually doesn't say that if you're too much in the right brain, you get lost, but that's kind of what Vervaeke's saying. And I wondered that. Like, in other words, if you're only right brain dominant and you never are able to switch to detail observation, that would be a handicap for sure, because you wouldn't be able to come to understand things fully that way. Because what he explains is that what the right brain does is it's scanning overview. It finds relevance, which he talks about in the next lecture, and it focuses in on it to determine certain things before it brings that information back to the whole to integrate. And I believe that's what I heard Vervaeke say more or less in the ninth lecture. And it really spoke to me in a way that was super, super helpful. Yeah, I just really the lecture 9 is just a real game changer for me. It's just really great. And so the next one too, but this 10 is amazing too, and it's equally amazing. But this one as a foundational framing, I was just like, God, that's helpful, because now we're getting down to the brass tacks of how do you actually alter your system of perception through practices in a way that actually makes you wiser. That's the question, and I feel like I'm getting some real answers here.
Yeah.
So that's my overview.
Yeah, fantastic. Cam?
Yeah, I can definitely echo that sentiment.
Vish, go ahead, sorry.
I think 9 has been my favorite video in the series so far. And it's kind of what you were saying, Michael. The structure and the framing of sort of scaling up and down attention really made sense to me. And it was so much easier to understand both ends of that spectrum when people talk about, having like an awakening moment or like a spiritual experience. It is usually either that, I think he calls it at-one-ment or the pure consciousness experience, I think. There's a really good way to look at this. And it clarified some things for me as well. I have not been meditating as often as I should, but I've always been confused about exactly what I should be trying to do when I meditate. But this is a very useful lens through which to try and approach it.
Or even why you're doing it. Like what's the purpose? What's it's not, you're not supposed to have goals, right? But still, like, I mean, exactly what is this going to do to help me? And now I'm like, oh, I got a clue now how it might be. And, so that's, anyway, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. Cam, you're next.
Even the basic idea that meditation has two parts to it. Mindfulness has two parts to it. The meditation, which is reflection, and paying attention. Like he's saying reflection and meditation are two parts of mindfulness. Reflection gets you the insight, like looks at the frame, the gestalt. And then mindfulness gets you to the very specific here and now, focus on the breath, etc. The specifics. I think he continues to use that gestalt versus feature frame. Like how do you zoom out and then zoom in, zoom out? And I think that combination, that you need to have both. And I actually agree with you that we all are born with some proclivities. Some of us are good at one versus another, one end of the spectrum versus another.
Typically.
And the errors or our foolishness come from when we are either too much thinking on the frames, not looking at the detail, or too much caught in the detail, not reframing ourselves. And the third thing, just to build on that, what I really loved was this idea of infinite cascading of frames. Like you can have a frame you look through at the object.
Fabulous.
Then you can step out and say, now I'm looking at the another frame, and then you can, it's an infinite regress of both the detail and the frame. And his metaphor of looking through the glasses, and you can then look at the glasses, that is just amazing.
Fabulous
set of ideas.
I just wanted to add, he said that when you're doing certain kinds of meditation, you're paying attention to how you're paying attention, which is the same thing as looking at your glasses instead of looking through them. And I'm just like, fabulous. Like that's, and also he ties it to flow too, which is fabulous too. I'm like, yep, got it. You're kind of bouncing between the two optimally, right? So that you can, flow and through something usefully. I mean, anyway, Cam, go ahead.
So there were two things that stood out. He offered a definition of wisdom. He said it's a systematic set of insights that are mutually related to a fundamental transformations of a person's existential mode. So when he says existential mode, I hear the having and the being. And he also uses the agent arena nomenclature. So there's that mutually, those two things are being transformed simultaneously and in concert with one another. And then the second thing, which reminds me of how we all came together in the first place, which was his training. So he called out his particular, how he was trained in an integrated fashion, I think is how he characterized it. And he said that he was trained in Vipassana, which is the scaling down and in, the narrowing, and then simultaneously with the metta practice, which is the scaling up and out, simultaneous with Tai Chi, which is the flow, the in and the out continually between the two, back and forth, one to the other. So the training, this little exercise that we're performing right now is largely propositional, perspectival propositional. And it's the lesser part of the trick, I think. It's the fully embodied practices are what allow for that cultivation of wisdom.
So right.
Anyway, so when he talks about actual training, ways of training, it tends to catch my attention.
Yeah, me too. I'm really looking forward to him going deeper into that, and as I know he will, and he's going to get very specific, I'm sure.
Other thing for me that hit me, a personal anecdote, is that this whole idea of you can meditate for reflection, and then you can meditate for insight, like focusing on here and now and the breath. And when a few years ago, when I was going through some life choices and career transitions, I didn't realize that while I'd been doing the breathing focus practice to calm myself down, like what you would call literally Vipassana style, focus on your breath for a while, not much, but for a while, and it had given me some benefit of being calm and focused. I had actually not spent enough time reflecting on the bigger picture.
Mhm.
And then I took 3 days off to go into the mountains, 2 days at an offsite at a quiet place on my own in a cabin. And I thought I would go there and do the breath work and all that stuff. Instead, I ended up just sitting over there and reflecting on the bigger frame, like what I want to do, where I'm coming from, what I wish, etc. So it's interesting because I went there thinking I would do the Vipassana style. Instead, I just ended up writing a lot in my journal, reflecting on like what I would say the insights, the frame, a lot more than the here and now. And I came back quite energized and refreshed because while I'd been doing the meditation, the breath work, I'd not, there was a backlog I had to do. So I really appreciated the fact that you have to do both. Just doing the breath work, to your point, is not going to get you there if you don't reflect at the larger picture and maybe change your frame of life or your meaning or your relationships. And I found that if you're going through some significant life transition, maybe you need to just consciously set aside some time to create looking at the frames you have put on yourself.
Or just
Yeah.
disrupting them outright, just
Yeah.
putting the body into a circumstance that is entirely unfamiliar and paying attention.
Yeah, in my case, it was I had to literally say I'm going to go away for 2 days, and those 2 days I am painfully going to just do nothing but reflect, or going to some other embodied experience where you are forced to look at your frames.
Yeah, I think it's also curious that he said that the evidence is very strong that people that seek out altered states of being are more wise. And I just was fascinated by that too. It means from all different means, you can do it through breath work, cold exposure, whatever. I mean, it's just, but if, he even says animals even seek out that, which I've experienced firsthand. When I was married, we had 2 cats, Abyssinian cats. One of them was very outgoing and gregarious. And I just, as a lark, she was sitting on a stool that was in my office at home that spun, one of those that spin around. So I just thought it would be funny to spin her around. So the first time I did it, she got dizzy and kind of disoriented, jumped off, ran out. But then she came back and sat there and looked at me. And then I spun her again and she liked it. And she then from then on, she wanted to be spun on the chair every day, multiple times. And when we finally got divorced, my ex-wife would email me and say, you left me with this cat. No, she's joking because she thought it was quite amusing. She goes, she wants to be spun all day long because you trained her to like it. And I thought it was hilarious. But that's the same thing. I mean, the cat must have liked that sense of being disoriented.
Yeah.
Just like kids like a merry-go-round. It's the same thing, right? It's basically a merry-go-round. So that was an interesting thing that came up when I was reading it. I'm like, yeah, my God, I've actually seen animals do this, where they want.
The whole practice in Sufi dervishes is spinning.
Yeah, right.
The direct path to altered state is spinning for hours, and that's
whirling dervishes.
Exactly, and it works. I've seen it. I've been part of some of those performances.
And the monks, sing all day long.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain kinds of monks, I can't remember what order it is. They sing for literally 8 hours a day. That's what they do. That's their job, so to speak. They sing mostly and pray some, but they sing 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And they're very healthy.
Yeah.
Because of that.
I thought he made the point as well, though, that it's not just any altered state of consciousness. I thought he made the point that some of them are actually deleterious.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think that's obviously, some people that take psychedelics don't benefit.
Yeah.
Because they're doing it for the wrong reason. I think, because I met many people, my hippie parents did it as well. They took tons of acid, and I swear to God, maybe I'm biased, but I didn't see an ounce of wisdom come from it. That's just my bias, but I certainly didn't. So
Well,
I was,
music as a pathway to altered states is very well known and shown and proven. And just building on what you're saying, just monk singing, there's a whole movement of Hinduism called Bhakti movement, which comes down to just devotional singing as a pathway for spiritual higher paths to realization. So I think part of altered state is through singing, whether it's Baptist church or whether it's Bhakti movement of India, Hindus.
or the choir in the Catholic Church or the Baptist. You have all those very musically oriented. I mean, I think every spiritual practice and religion I can think of has music.
Yeah.
Usually it's a central feature, actually.
Yeah. What else? Anything else, Vish, from your side or anybody else for that chapter?
I feel like we've covered most of the points there. I mean, they're all deep points. These are each things that I think it's easy to talk about. It's going to take me a long time to actually put that into practice. I even need to go find out like what is a good way to do contemplative practices, because I don't believe that I've ever actually looked for that specifically. And then maybe echoing something that Cam said, which I think made a lot of deep sense to me, which is he even points out that there is a third form of awakening. Maybe that's a good term.
Mystical experiences. He categorized three
mystical experience.
forms
Thank
of
you.
mystical experience.
Yeah, and he actually took the combination of the first two as a distinct one. It wasn't just the sum of its parts.
Can you summarize what those three were? I'm trying.
Yeah, please. I can't remember them off the top of my head.
The first one was the pure consciousness event, and if I understood it correctly, that's like a practice of Vipassana will eventually lead to that. And then the second one is a super flowing resonant atonement, which I've experienced that for sure on motorcycles, where it's like the agent arena relationship is in this hyper dynamic circumstance and the joy is ridiculous. And then the third one that Vish is talking about, which is something, I think that's what he was getting at with the Tai Chi flowing in and out, is he called it a non-duality. And he said that's the mystical experience that allows for the remembering of the being mode.
Right. And didn't he say it's a simultaneous awareness of the two states? Is that right?
Yes.
That's right.
I don't remember if he said simultaneous, but it was definitely at least a harmonic oscillation between the two. Could have been simultaneous.
I think he more or less said that you're aware of both at the same time. Maybe it's an oscillation because that could be really quick, but that to me was also fascinating. Like
I'm going to tie it to if I remember it from my notes, he calls this prajna, the Prajna, prajna.
Oh yeah.
Actually, it's very interesting because recently I've been going down the rabbit hole of non-dualistic Vedantism, which is a very narrow branch of Indian philosophy of Upanishads, which is a religious text. And they have this idea of non-dualism, which is what he's talking about in the third state, where both the states of consciousness and existence come together and there's no contradiction. And you can reflect on it in a unified way. It's more of a metaphysical view of that Upanishads, but he's talking about experience from within, which is different. This is very
it's like a stabilized circumstance. I find in myself that I am increasingly and uncomfortably aware of how powerful the sense of individuation is, like how powerfully I believe that I'm a thing, like I'm a separate thing, while simultaneously really knowing that that's not real at all.
That's very interesting.
That's really interesting point. I agree.
Yeah. So that's this is interesting. Yeah.
I wanted to share a resource with you guys. I meant to do it right away, but I forgot. I was thinking this week wouldn't it be nice if I could read the transcript without using
Oh, yeah.
YouTube, because it's awkward. So this website, this team of 3 people, they put together a transcript of the whole series, and to download it on a PDF is $9.
Oh my
Actually,
God.
I gave them 20 because I'm like, oh my God, you guys deserve 100. But I'm just like, and so it's really helpful because I'm actually a good listener, but this material I find it's a little easier for me to absorb when I read it. And I
Well,
read
he
the
coins
last,
a few words of his own too
yes,
along the way.
he certainly does. It's like, but anyway, I really highly recommend that resource. I think that they deserve.
Oh my
Definitely.
God. Thank you so much. What
Yeah,
a
it's really
what a
helpful.
fantastic resource. And they
And they
even
actually,
have diagrams, which is amazing.
yeah, they actually also have on the document after each chapter, there's additional resources. So you can, and they've got an index that's just like if you were reading a book. So you can just look up what chapter you want. It's like it's over 1,100 pages long, which is really funny.
Yeah, this is pretty amazing.
But yeah, they have episode 13 notes, and then there's a link, and then it'll send you these additional notes that they find useful.
Do they have a reference to the links to the books that he mentions along the way?
No, there's no links, but obviously you can, that I know of at least. But oh no, wait a minute, there is some.
Separately,
Yes.
I know there is a bibliography somewhere.
Oh no, there is. All the books are listed with links. I just realized that. And
fantastic.
yeah, and even certain definitions, dukkha, sorrow or suffering, Sanskrit in Buddhist thought, and so on. So confirmation bias, they define certain things at the end of certain episodes. So anyway, I thought you guys would really appreciate that, given that I'm sure that you're struggling as much as I am, given that I actually thought about this today. I'm like, this course isn't even a year. It's more than a year of college, right? Because you have every week one lecture, 51. There's not even that many in a school year, right? So yeah. I was like, no wonder this is hard. And each episode is very, very dense. Like, if I was just a student, it'd be perfect. So it's
a significant project, especially if you start going down the rabbit hole of all the references and
of course, if you probably ask you to write essays about your understanding of it, which actually would be hard, but it would be helpful because then you would review and solidify and argue or present it in a certain way. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of bring that up, that what we're doing, this course is not a weekend workshop at all. I mean, it's way better than that, that's for sure.
As a way of transition, what I found really good was that this whole episode on insight was such a foundational precursor and a rich episode on its own, yet a necessary episode before he talks about consciousness, which is like a whole another level in the next episode. Right? So I thought both of those were heavy lift episodes, but fantastically constructed and structured.
I agree.
And I'll just tee up the next episode, number 10, on consciousness. To me, the breathtaking part of that was I'd read some books on consciousness, etc. They get very metaphysical very quickly or abstract. And what I liked was that the way he phrases the whole project as what does it do, right? Rather than what it is. And then and I think that was a fantastic, just a way to get into the subject.
Yeah, I agree. This chapter was equally powerful for me as number 9, because I have been aware of relevance for years in my own existence, and it's actually been the most helpful thing to bring me out of trouble in my life, and I've had plenty of that. So when he was talking about it so clearly and so precise, kind of what he called it was very coherent. It really helped me because I was like, yes, relevance is what allows you to know what to focus on the most, right? That's the whole point. And the thing that was even more deep for me and profound is I gave a lecture last week. Is that right? Last Thursday? Yes. For my students that are in my chronic pain class online. And I was talking about sound. And I have a couple therapies that I've used on myself and I've used on certain clients that are sound based. And here's the crazy part. So the Mateus method, yeah, I think that's how you say his last name. He was the first Westerner, at least, to use sound in a very precise way to help people with certain processing disorders. So what he discovered is that dyslexia, autism, and many other disorders, including PTSD, eventually they discovered, is actually a sound processing disorder primarily. Now, that doesn't mean everyone that has it's going to get better, 100% from the sound therapy, but it's a huge foundational thing. And here's why. Because when you can't process sound properly, or sensation generally, you have no idea what to focus on. So this is exactly what the literature says, is that when you have a sound processing disorder, which I had, because I'm dyslexic, then everything's salient at once, which is horrible, because you can't figure out what's first, what's second, what's third. And so you're flooded constantly with data you can't organize. And so chapter 10 was all about that. And I was just like so taken and impressed by our ancient ancestors that figure this shit out without any scientific method even, or maybe it was just beginning in the Greek times. I'm just totally impressed. I know he's combining this modern neuroscience, but even so, that, given my experience of how much these sound therapies have changed my life, and also the fact that these sound therapies follow his model of a virtual engine, because what it does is it corrects the wiring in your system to optimize sorting of data so that you can actually function at the highest level of your ability, rather than being overwhelmed and flooded constantly and knocked down by typical stimulus or typical challenges. So that was pretty spine-tingling to read this and going, oh my God, this is the same framework as what I just read about sound therapies that I do.
And you're referring to the 4 stages he lays out. The first is the salience landscape. Then you become conscious of it. And then you have what he calls presence landscape, which starts telling you of all the things that are potentially worthy of your attention. These are the few that you want to be present to, and that gives you affordances. And then you get to what he calls depth landscape. Now you can, not only are you present, you can now start seeing patterns of causation, and that starts giving you more control. And then finally,
more
significance landscape.
You become more effective adaptively at responding to your world. That's what he's saying, and that's what the trauma and sound therapy stuff that I've studied says. It's the same thing. Is that now there is a difference, is that, and maybe not such a difference, because here's the thing: if you do the right kind of training for what you need, everything becomes automatic. So you're not thinking about it. It's actually already organized better. That kind of the whole the software and the hardware both, I think, is what changes, because your neurons shift and you have different neural pathway and different body-brain relationship. And then what happens is that biological organization becomes optimized, and therefore it frees up you to think about other things, because you're not trying to just struggle through something like the soundscape of your environment, or for me, trying to read, because that was painful. And that becomes, that starts to flow. And so that virtual engine starts working, and then your higher purpose, whatever that might be, becomes possible, because you're not just in the mud trying to sling your way, drag yourself through the mud every day. You're actually walking around it and walking beyond it so that you can, have a better life. And that, because I would always kind of run into walls all the time. And I had good aspirations, but I couldn't function at a basic level properly, which was, most of my problems was related to that, which is also trauma too. PTSD is the same thing, is that you can't successfully sort sensory data in a way that's useful for your life, and you're actually reacting in a way that's maladaptive, because you're afraid of everything, or you're angry all the time, or you can't get yourself to expand your horizons, because every time you do, you get so anxious that you can't function. So this is, anyway, I found that chapter 10 really is quite aligned with these other sciences that I'm studying now, and that I've seen to be amazingly effective with some people. So that was very, very moving and very exciting to see him talk about this.
Vish, Cam, what do you think? What's your observation?
So, I mean, overall, there was a lot that I enjoyed about this chapter, but I think the one unanswered question that I have about this is that I didn't find anything in what he was saying here that maybe required conscious awareness of ourselves. And it felt like maybe all of these things could just be performed by, our default mode network or our fast mode of thinking, whatever you want to call it, without necessarily requiring our neocortex and our recognition of ourselves, any of that. And so it wasn't, maybe it's partly because my misassociation of consciousness involves that sort of awareness of self. And nothing here helped explain why that came about.
So it's interesting. I saw it differently. The reason I saw it differently, if I may, at least how I took it away, was that when he's talking about 4 different stages, so to speak, and I see these as stages that one can control and go through consciously. So at that level, I saw that as a question of skill, not just, oh, we all have those default automatic. I think the baseline, like salience landscape, is perhaps the default, like everybody gets attention gets diverted to whatever is salient in the around you. But the moment you say be present, then, and being present meaning you have to be careful then chasing anything that's salient. You have to start paying attention to some things. And then he says why be present is because it'll give you some affordances. That's the language he's using to say that it'll give you a stepping stone or a ladder to get out of the noise of the salience. Everything is shiny if you're present, right? And then he said, and so that's really the interesting thing, because being absent-minded or being completely lost or completely distracted by whatever the sights are versus being present, doors start opening or steps start appearing conceptually that allow you to get a better grip on what's going on around you. It's like being in a crowd and suddenly you realize that there might be a danger or an opportunity or something. Suddenly your senses are not just simply focused on anything and everything around you. And then he says the next step is depth landscape, like not just being present, and then you start seeing patterns of causation. Then you say, aha, that is important because that's driving this. Or look at that might not be that important, but this might affect it. And then you are not just only present, you are actually figuring out the depth of the situation, the interactions and the causation. And that's a higher level consciousness skill. And not everybody would have it. And perhaps if you have enough of the quote unquote wisdom or practice, embodied practices, you are more aware of that, not just affordances, but causation and how events are going to affect you. And finally, he's saying significance landscape is what prevents you from bullshitting yourself. So you can say, okay, for all the things I'm observing and all the things that are happening, interacting, that and that is important. And that's what's significant I need to pay attention to. That's, to your point, relevant and significant. And everything else then is not. And the wisdom in his mind is your ability in any situation to be able to go from the salience noise to all the way up to saying that and that. That's it, right? So to me, that's kind of the journey I saw him paint. And then later on in future chapters, he describes the mechanics in a lot more detail. But that's how I saw him connecting it to wisdom. Because that if you are truly in the significance stage, then you're wise to the bullshit around you. You'll not be fooled, because you are picking out the contextually relevant, environmentally significant 1 or 2 pieces of like things that give you the best affordance and the best grasp of optimal grip of what you need to do, is how I took it.
Okay, I can see that, but would you consider
an animal low in the animal kingdom is also conscious? And if so, like which of these four modes of being do you think they would go through? And is there a level there somewhere that we would
It's very
say,
interesting. I don't see him talking about consciousness in abstract as, what it is, who has it, what's the boundary level, do ants have it, do higher out. I think that's the debate he's completely avoiding, and very smartly. What he's saying is that I don't want to discuss the properties of consciousness, because that will get us into metaphysical, theoretical discussions. Not that they're not important, but that's like a completely different project. And what I'm hearing him say is that rather than do that, I'd rather talk about what is it for? When it
what's the purpose?
His approach is, I'm going to just look at consciousness as a set of capabilities for human beings, and what does it afford us? What is it for? And then he's saying it's for helping us not bullshit ourselves. And then he's laying out these stages of how human beings have the capacity to use consciousness given to us without discussing what it is, on how to perform, how to become wise, which I think is a very smart project of just sidestepping the whole theory.
I agree, because that's such a contentious subject.
Yeah,
I even heard something recent. I was listening to something recently where they were talking about it and arguing about what it really was. And I think his direction is much more wise, because it's like we don't really know that other part, right?
Don't really care.
No, and
he says, I think I wrote this down verbatim. I might be wrong, but I think he says consciousness seems to be a way in which you can coordinate attention and other related abilities of awareness so as to optimize how insightfully you can make sense of your world, which is that's what I was hearing you just say, Anurag. And it's reminding me, listening to you and reading that now is reminding me of something early in episode 9, where I think he refers to insight as a character trait. So a character, so there's the localized identity. That's the down and in focus. That's the sense of self. There's this character, the agent, operating in the arena, and consciousness is, I'm consciously aware that I am both the agent and arena, and both are dynamic, both are fluctuating all of the time. And the optimization of attention is the sorting out, like the rank ordering of the most important relationships, given that super hyper localized identity, me, the character, in relation to all of the constituent elements of the arena.
Yep. Dude, that's
while
well
being
said.
simultaneously aware of all of
it. Yeah.
Well,
but,
go ahead, sir.
You bring up a very good point that he is sidestepping, like the Buddhist tradition. He's sidestepping the metaphysics of it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I wasn't even concerned about that part of it. I think it was just even trying to answer what consciousness is for, like the purpose of it, which is I think what he's focusing on. I guess my doubt or uncertainty is just how that purpose includes a sense of awareness, or if it even does.
It's a good question. I mean, we'll see if that's answered later. I mean, I think that's
I'm okay not knowing that for now.
Yeah. Can you spell your doubt a little bit better? I want to understand. I think you're onto something. I want to hear what's your concern or doubt, or what doubts were left in your mind.
To me, and maybe I'm getting partly into what consciousness is, but to me, I mean, it seems like awareness is always like a self-awareness is always associated with consciousness or with being conscious. And I was trying to map that to what the purpose of consciousness was, as Vervaeke is explaining it. But nothing in his explanation made it obvious to me why that seems to be the case. Or I could take his explanation and map it to maybe an animal and say, okay, I can see this purpose being sort of performed by that animal. And it might be that that animal could do it even without a real sense of self.
Interesting.
A good question.
You're right in the fact that he sidesteps the whole conversation by saying and assuming that humans are self-aware. And consciousness includes self-awareness of
Yeah.
our mental states. And that's why our rationality, which is our logos of managing the world, is the same function that allows us to fool ourselves, right? Because we're self-aware of our inner thoughts as much as, aware of what's out there and what we're engaging with. So his entire project gets off the ground with those assumptions.
Yeah.
What he doesn't do is to say, what about the category of animals that might not be self-aware? Like,
Right.
and that's a very important question. He's only talking about humans who are self-aware as part of being conscious,
Yeah.
how they fool themselves and how the project has to be managed because of that.
Yeah, and I'm okay concerning ourselves with just that part of it for now.
It's an interesting doubt, and the way you expressed it actually opened the door for understanding what the floor is on which we're talking.
Yeah, it's a very relevant question.
Yeah.
And the other thing, this is not in his material at this point, but one of the things that this discussion has helped me also realize is why adversity is so critical for your development. Because adversity is a really good way to tune your salience virtual engine. And I've had plenty of that in my life. And here's why I think it's so critical. It shows you where you're full of shit. Because it hurts. Like you get, when you get smacked, or when you start, you don't eat, or when you're going to lose your apartment because you're not effective. You either figure out real quick how to rearrange your relevance landscape, or you fail. And if you have too much cushion, you never have to do that, because there's no consequence that's hurtful, that really slams you, right? So this is of course, too much adversity can traumatize you, but a certain level of adversity is essential for one to know what relevance really is in an effective way. Because if you're in the, trapped in the wilderness and you don't know where you are, and you're kind of, oh shit, I might die, relevance becomes very relevant, because if you screw up, that might be the end of you. And it doesn't have to be that dramatic, but I think you guys get the point. Yeah. Which I don't know if he's going to bring it up later, but I actually think that a certain level of adversity is essential for growth.
He doesn't bring it up in the context of adversity, but in one of the early chapters where he's talking about the flow state, right? He's very clear that one of the preconditions for that is where the consequences are very tangible.
That's right, because it's a feedback loop. That's what adversity is a very relevant feedback loop. Yeah. Because it matters a lot. That's what he says. It has to matter to you whether you succeed, right?
Yeah.
So I think I just thought I would bring that up, because my own life has been full of that, and I bemoaned it for years, but I also realized that on many levels it's made me wiser, because I've been through things that are real, and I've succeeded at getting out of them, and I'm like, that helped me be wiser, and now I'm not so easily fooled by certain things because of that.
In listening to you, it's causing me to think about life at a planetary scale. I'm partway through there's a series on Netflix now that's narrated by Morgan Freeman, and it's I forget what it's titled, but
I've seen it.
You've seen it. It's the history of life on Earth, and it goes through it's geologic time. It's 4.5 billion years worth of history. And talk about adversity, man. I just watched the episode where they did a beautiful job of having the asteroid. They have it coming over the horizon of the moon, and then torpedoing Earth, and just the Armageddon, the consequent Armageddon, that wipes out the dinosaurs. And so I guess I'm bringing that up in the context of this conversation about consciousness itself. It's like life is somehow now able on this planet it's conscious of existential threats at that scale.
That's
And
right.
it's capable of apprehending them with a very high degree of precision. It's astonishing.
You're referring to which part? Apprehending them. What do you mean by that?
Geolocating or spatially, or like we can see those things coming from probably
right.
beyond the solar
yes.
system
Yeah.
now.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yes.
I
So,
mean, we're currently
Whoever
tracking
we are,
thousands of them right
we
now.
conscious beings
yes, of course.
who emanate from the planet that got spanked. What did you say? If you get smacked, Michael?
Yeah, you don't
The
forget. I'll
planet
tell you.
got smacked.
Yep.
I would be remiss. That series is very good, except for the last episode. I don't want to steal your thunder. We
Okay.
can separately talk about it. The series is on 5 extinctions in the geological time frame and how life form on Earth has evolved through these 5 extinction events, including up to 80% of the life getting wiped out for several hundred million years. So it's a very powerful set of series, and we will put a pin on it, and we can talk offline.
I'll do my best to watch it so I can talk to you. It seems like a really relevant thing to watch. So
I don't know whether it's relevant or not, but it's definitely insightful around what I would say history of life on Earth, and how life has evolved through the checkered chances we've had. So what's interesting is the fact that Cam made a point, which is very profound, which is we finally are humans at the stage where, with a sufficiently advanced technology, unlike dinosaurs, we have the ability to deflect an oncoming asteroid.
Yep.
Which is such a profound point. Have you heard of David Deutsch? Anyone?
Oh, yeah.
Infinity?
Yeah.
Beginning of Infinity. Cam, have you read that?
I haven't read his work, but I know he is.
I don't think so. I think I've heard the name.
Okay, so
what's the name of the book again?
David Deutsch is a physicist. His work is just profoundly brilliant. And the 2 most important books he wrote, one is called Fabric of Life, other is called Beginning of Infinity. And these are mind-bending books. And it all, just like Vervaeke changed my perspective radically on what wisdom is and how to think about it, David Deutsch is the other thinker who completely altered my view on physics and how the world works and how unique the situation is in understanding the physical world. So he's a world-class physicist, philosopher. And his books are like Vervaeke's, like thick to chew on. It'll take you a while to go through, and chances are you'll go through the book a couple of times, but they're definitely worth it. But he makes a very simple point that unlike other animals in the past, we have the ability to shape the world and universe in a way that none of the previous life forms did. And he gives a thought experiment saying, imagine if somebody was observing us from afar and they say, here is a planet which is going to get torpedoed by a comet or an asteroid. And suddenly the observers from far away see that asteroid getting deflected.
Yeah.
Right? They would say it will blow their mind, because they would say there's some intelligence at work here which is able to shape interplanetary events in a way that it can deflect incoming objects at that scale. And it's just actually a mind-bending point he makes, among many, many others. Versus we are just scum of the earth and we have no
all that crap.
Yeah.
I can't stand that shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, God,
Anyway.
it's just it's tired of it. It's like, yeah, okay. I'm gonna make a note because I actually just finished a book by it says Life 3.0 by another physicist from MIT. Let's see, what's his name? Where did I hide my phone? It's Telemark, Max Telemark, I think is his name.
Techmark, yeah.
Techmark, and it's about AI and the ethics of AI. But one of the things he talks about in that book that's so incredible is about the evolution of life on the planet. And what he says is that evolution is this rhythm, which, by the way, I think reflects exactly what Vervaeke's talking about, which is you have a certain finite number of resources. So we were talking about the what was it called again? The player in the game. What is it?
Agent and
An
arena.
arena. So agent in the arena. And what happens is you have this flourishing followed by a die-off and then a reorganization, because of the ones that survive are the ones, if they survive at all, the ones that are more adapted and more resilient. And there's competition, and this continues in this sort of upward spiral of refinement, which I think is, very much reflective of what Vervaeke is trying to teach us, is how to engage consciously in that upward spiral of engagement and refined complexity of your own being. So I just thought, by the way, that book is so worth reading. It is fantastic, especially because AI is, barreling down upon us, and it's very relevant. But what he brings up is so helpful. I really, and it's timeless. It was written in 2017, but it's not even a little unrelevant, because he's talking about ethics. So ethics don't, fade away because, technology advances. It's still very relevant. And he talks about even the super intelligence and what that might bring us to in terms of the universe and the, I mean, it gets way out there, man. He takes you way out to the, talk about overview. Boy, he goes way out into the universe and says, here's the potentials if super intelligence is possible. So it's I didn't expect to go that far out into the ozone, but it was a good trip. It was a really nice journey. So good reframing, as they say, right?
So we have about a few minutes left. I want to make sure. So one final point on the last episode we just finished talking about is that he closes out with a very interesting concept, which I think he is going to talk about later, which we haven't talked about, which is this concept that higher states of consciousness are considered more real in certain experiences than, quote unquote, the dream state, which everybody understands is not real, or some everyday life. And he points it out as a very unique phenomena versus traditional view of having a trip, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those who have that never say, they just say that's just the level of reality that's, I'm now living in the fake world, so to speak. And I found that to be very interesting twist.
I agree. I've read about this elsewhere. Like, did you guys ever read How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan?
Yes.
He talks about that a lot in there, about people that are about to die or they have horrible trauma, and they go through a really good psychedelic experience, and the reframing is profound, and they're transformed. And even if they're going to die, they're fine with it. They're like, oh, I'm going to be reintegrated into the whole. Everything's fine. And they tell their loved ones, don't worry, I'm going to be fine. You're going to be fine. I'm like, wow. I think it's, but the thing that interests me is what constitutes or what generates that experience versus the meaningless one. What are the elements? What's the ingredient list that, or I don't know, being list? What is the way in which you must be to hopefully facilitate that result? That's what I'm curious about.
That's a fantastic question to leave us on, since we have about a minute or two to wrap up. If you don't mind, I'll stop the recording